All right. I am your host for this Agronomic Monday, Lindsay Smith, and joining me again, Peter Johnson. Pete, I did mention smoke, so I want to touch on it here before we move on to a few other things because it seems to be with all these forest fires, they are early this year for the West. We hope we'll get some better weather for it, but Manitoba certainly, we've seen, evacuation of Flin Flon and all sorts of other areas. Very scary. And it is causing, of course, smoke in the atmosphere that does move. And so it always begs the question, what impact does this have on the crop? And I also had Kelvin Hepner here. You may remember him from such films as Real Agriculture. He had a question about potentially even herbicide efficacy, etc. So let's start with impact on the crop this early in the year.
Yeah, and so most of the time we don't worry a lot about the amount of sunshine that crops are getting this time of year because they're not in grain fill, but we definitely need sunshine. Like that's what creates photosynthesis. And if you go back to when we had the Fort McMurray fires, that was one of the very few times that I've ever seen head size in a wheat crop limit the yield potential. So in northern Saskatchewan, the agricultural area of northern Saskatchewan, the smoke was so thick from those Fort McMurray fires right at that five leaf stage of the spring wheat crop when it's forming the head in the plant that it reduced photosynthesis so much that the head size, it just made very small heads.
Mm.
And then later the fires disappeared, but they had poor yields because even though wheat can set, 3, 4 kernels at every spikelet, those heads were so small they didn't have enough spikelets even when they set multiple kernels to give good yield potential. So even from a tillering standpoint, now most of the time in spring wheat in Western Canada, we don't rely a lot on tillers. A lot of Western Canada growers don't really like
That's right.
tillers.
Yeah.
So it's from that perspective, maybe not a big deal, but absolutely it is an issue if we get heavy smoke for an extended period of time. It will reduce the amount of photosynthesis with all plants. We need to create a big factory. If we don't
Right.
create a big factory before we flower, then we are going to have an impact on yield. Hopefully minimal at this point, but potentially yes. The herbicide one is really interesting. And the one that would probably get impacted the most would be Liberty. So the burn herbicides that require sunlight to activate them. And we know that we get the best control with a product like Liberty when we spray it in the heat of the day and it's sunny and it just smokes things, baby. Yeah, it's if we don't get the sunshine and we don't get that activation of the herbicide, then we're not going to get as good a control. With the other herbicides, I don't think it will have a big impact because they're not as sunlight driven.
Right.
But I think we do have to watch that. And Liberty's a big herbicide in Western Canada,
Yeah,
right? And so we
for
want
sure.
to we want to spray it before a nice sunny day. And if we don't get the sunny day, yeah, it could have an impact.
So now, and this, I mean, we went through this a couple of years ago here in Ontario where we had a very smoky June. It is more common to have, smoky conditions later in the growing season for Western Canada. And so that is why I think so many people are asking this question now, because as you mentioned, I mean, canola and wheat, I mean, they set their potential very early in the season. So if it's cloudy during that time, so I guess just to balance that out of curiosity, let's say it's more like July, like during, say, flowering or during grain fill for wheat, does it have the same impact or less so?
So it has way more impact. So
Interesting.
the critical period for wheat is basically 2 weeks prior to heading to anthesis to 10 days after. With corn, it's 10 days prior to tassel to 2 weeks after or 10 days after. With canola, it's kind of that flowering stage and after. So most plants, the real critical period is around that flowering window. And with a plant like canola, it's a lot more forgiving because it flowers over a long period of time. Soybeans flower over a long period of time.
Right.
Crops that flower on a very short period of time, that that window or that critical timing, that critical period is much tighter, much more defined, if you will. And
Mm.
if you have lack of sunshine because you've got heavy cloud cover, then that will have a lot more yield impact than we're ever going to see with cloudy conditions now.
Mm-hmm.